Namaste to all of you. I'm glad to be with you here tonight for the evening of our usually weekly or periodical satsangs. I am in the middle of making a great commentary on the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, one of the three most important texts in terms of Hatha Yoga. And we are well into the first chapter already. There was a tradition a few years ago in Agama that in the first 1 week, 2 weeks of the year, we always started with a presentation of what is yoga, what is tantric yoga, what is Agama yoga, so that people have a bit of a periodical orientation about what we do here in the school, what it is, this methodology that we practice and all the rest. I will see if that would be the case, maybe in a week or 2 or 3, I will also include a satsang or 2 on those themes. Right now we are full power into commenting a very esoteric and very traditional yoga text, which refers precisely to the thing which you see first in Agama. When you see first in Agama, you learn a few things about the fundamental principles, such as the principle of correspondence, the workings of the law of resonance, and a few other such fundamental truths. And then you start working to feel your energy, to guide the energy, to produce phenomena of resonance, and you work with the body. 80% of the work which you do in the first month of yoga, in your first level of yoga when you come here, is that you work with the help of the body. Either you bend over your body in Padahastasana, or you put your body upside down in Shirshasana. The body is used extensively. This methodology is what is generically called in India the Hatha Yoga, and this yoga which uses the physical body is usually the best start in yoga, because in the beginning, when people come to yoga, their power of concentration of the mind is almost zero, their attention span is very, very small, and they don't feel their energies, they don't feel their chakras, they do not control anything almost in their body and system, and therefore Hatha Yoga is usually the best way to start. You do 6 months or 1 year of Hatha Yoga, you are a different person already. Things are moving in a totally different way in you. That's why Hatha Yoga is fundamental. Today it is relegated to a simple gymnastics and contortionism, and people think yoga is just some acrobatic, flexible thing. 95% of the students in yoga are women who do it for fitness and for gracefulness and for other qualities of the body and so on. That means Hatha Yoga is terribly persecuted and misunderstood. And for me, it was a joy to, after having commented on the Gheranda Samhita a few years ago, about 10 years ago, to now turn back to one of the 3 fundamental texts of Hatha Yoga, this one being the second. Therefore, here the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. And we had done already 3 lessons, 3 satsangs in the chapter number 1, and the last one ended in the Sloka. It's a Sanskrit name for verset, double verse, the verset or the Sloka number 43, concluding after the presentation of what is considered to be the most important sitting asana, the asana which is it alone can generate enlightenment and states of samadhi. Alone, that asana practiced is a yoga in itself, and I'm talking, of course, about Siddhasana. That's why the Shloka number 43 was concluding rightly, there is no asana like Siddhasana. Siddhasana is the number 1 asana. It's not a very healing asana. It's not very acrobatic. It doesn't have many exoteric functions. It doesn't deal with your blood pressure or God knows what else. it is an asana which is 90% of it focused on the rising of the state of consciousness, on the state of your mind, on the resonance of your spirit, and therefore on the spiritual accomplishments. And the text had promised us, for those who still remember what I read before starting Siddhasana, for whom almost 10 shlokas have been dedicated, a lot of text. These yoga texts are very elliptic, very brief. They talk 1-2 verses quickly about a technique. And here they consecrated more than 8 shlokas to this one alone, Siddhasana. And then without any further ado, the text is moving to the second one. We were told at some point that Shiva presented 84,000 asanas. Out of them, 84 asanas are done mostly by human beings. They are the most famous asanas of Hatha Yoga. And out of those 84 asanas, 4 are considered to be the essence of the essence. This text, Hatha Yoga Pradipika, describes 16 asanas. And then after the first 12, it says, well, now let us tell you about the 4 most important ones. Another fundamental text, the Shiva Samhita, describes only these 4, while a text which is a bit more developed in asanas, which is the Geranda Samhita, already commented by me again several years ago, it talks about 32 different asanas. Therefore, we are in the end of the chapter 1, where they boil it down to 4 asanas. And all these 4 asanas, as you are going to see, and you heard it mentioned already when I listed them, they are sitting asanas. Therefore, they are more or less meditation asanas. Without any further ado, therefore, the text in the shloka number 44 goes to the second most proeminent asana, also a sitting asana, also an asana used for meditation and for the rising of Kundalini and for pranayama and for many other collateral technologies in yoga, which is perhaps even more emblematic than Siddhasana, although Siddhasana to the inner circle is the most esoteric one. And I'm talking, of course, about Padmasana, Padma meaning the lotus pose. Padmasana is about 3 times more difficult to perform than Siddhasana, which means out of 30 people who can practice Siddhasana, only 10 of them can also practice Padmasana. It's more tough on your knees. It's an asana which is more demanding for the legs. And there are people who can't do it after they start a yoga course for years and years. And always we have to go into it slowly, gradually. Here in Agama, at some point of the training, we even give preparatory postures for the lotus, like training postures, which will facilitate that in 6 months or in 12 months, you can become more elastic in your hips, in your ankle joints, and especially in your knees, so that you can do eventually the Padmasana. But many people say, oh, you do yoga, it means you can sit in the lotus pose. The people who are semi-learned in yoga, they would consider Padmasana, the lotus pose, emblematic. Even about Buddha, they would say that Buddha sits in the lotus pose, the famous cross-legged position of the Buddhas. The truth is that Buddha is practically never, except in some small sects of India, Buddha is never depicted in the lotus pose. Buddha is depicted either in semi-lotus or in something which is between lotus, Siddhasana, and even Svastikasana, sitting positions there. And therefore, the lotus pose truth is that it is more demanding. Is it worth it? You know what? I would say so. I would say that all of you who did 6 years of yoga, you should have struggled to do a bit of lotus pose, or at least you should be able to do the half lotus pose, because it's not a coincidence that it is so emblematic in yoga. It is still an exceptional asana, and it is an asana which works on Ajna chakra, and yoga is very fond on the third eye, on Ajna chakra, and because of that, making a bit of effort to be able to sit a few minutes in Padmasana and to feel its effect, I think it's worth it. But it is not your first priority. It's not, don't push it, because you push it, you can get terrible pain in your knees and even some damage in your knee joint if you push it too quickly, too much. So it's worth it, but you have to be modest. Remember that Oriental people, in particular Indians, but many others, they never had chairs in their houses, and therefore everybody was sitting cross-legged, tailor pose, like I sit now, on the floor. When you sit like this 10 hours per day, your knees and your ligaments, your hamstring and others, they become very relaxed, very extended, they are loose, and then from here to the lotus pose, there is very little. And therefore, people would go more easily in a floor-sitting culture towards the lotus than in a culture where you've been sitting 10 hours per day on a chair or on a sofa, and there the things are completely different. So let us see how does the Hatha Yoga Pradipika describe this fundamental and emblematic posture. Again, this one will be given quite a number of shlokas as well, 7, 8, 9 shlokas, which shows their importance. Remember in what we read in lessons in the satsangs, in the previous satsangs, that many asanas were given 1 shloka, and some asanas were privileged and given 2 shlokas, like, we spoke a lot about that one. Siddhasana, about 8 to 10 shlokas. Let's see Padmasana right now. Place the right foot on the left thigh and the left foot on the right one. Cross the arms behind the back and grab the big toes with the opposite hand. It's going through the back to the opposite side. Press the chin against the chest and gaze towards the tip of the nose. This is called Padmasana, which destroys the diseases of the practitioner. No, it's not. In the language of yoga, I warned you from the very beginning, and Hatha Yoga Pradipika is an excellent example of that the asanas are called 2, 3, 4, or even 5 different names. Sometimes version of the same asanas are called by different names of asanas, and sometimes one asana from north of India is called with the same name with a completely different asana from the south of India. This repertoire of names is practically not solved until today. If you go to the International Yoga Federation or to the National India Federation, there are about 10 in India, because everybody has a big ego and everybody says, I am the National Federation of India, and there are 10 such egocentric people in 10 different cities from India. Sometimes in the same city you find 3 of them, like in Bombay. Then each one of them, if you tell them, please sir, could you show us a picture or a diagram of Halasana? Could you show us a diagram of Dhanurasana? Could you show us a diagram of Ardhamatyendrasana? Could you show us Padmasana? They will show you. Everybody has an opinion. There is a sort of a list. If you go to the Bihar School of Yoga, they teach 100 asanas or whatever they teach, and they have a list in the end of each book, and with a page where you find the description of that asana. And they don't have any problem with the names, because they decided this should be called Halasana and this should be called Dhanurasana. But in the bigger India, that agreement has not been reached. Only gurus in their schools, and sometimes certain federations of yoga from India. And the chaos still continues. I told you in a previous satsang that the government of India has tried for many years to reach a common list of names, and still different schools practice different names. Here, this description is a description of an asana which you find in most of the gymnastic yoga books as well, but it's not called the lotus pose. It's called Baddha Padmasana. Badha, like in Bandha or like in Setu Bandhasana, being the tied up Padmasana, the tied lotus. You are in the lotus pose, and then you put your arms and you tie yourself up behind the back, catching the toes in the front. It's way more difficult than Padmasana, because on top of the fact that you have to put the legs in this pretty extreme position, the feet, then on top of it you have to make a special knot through the back. And for example, if you are a thick person, there's no way you can get your right hand to catch the left toe, or the other way around, or something. This is not the lotus pose. Is it wrong? No. It exists among the great asanas of yoga, and Gheranda Samhita mentions it separately. Only Gheranda Samhita would not call it Padmasana, because this is not a pure Padmasana. This is Padmasana with a variation, with the arms back, which modifies the circulation of energy through the arms and through the body. It's called Baddha Padmasana. It has a different effect on the energy, and on top of it, it contains two elements which every person who has done 1 year, 2 years, or several years of yoga recognizes immediately. It says, press the chin against the chest. That's not the position of the Buddha. Buddha doesn't sit like this. Buddha sits full on, head erect, and therefore this is not a meditation position. This is the famous Jalandhara Bandha. This is a bandha, one of the 3 most important bandhas. And then it says, gaze towards the tip of the nose. Hey, that's also a technique. It's Nasikagra Drishti. This is Trataka on the tip of the nose. So we have Padmasana with a Baddha Padmasana version to it, and with Jalandhara Bandha, and with nasal Trataka. This is not a pure Padmasana. It's Padmasana with 3 additions to it. And that's why to call this Padmasana is semantically wrong. It messes up the names. But a guy like Svatmarama, either he was on ganja or not, he couldn't care less. When he wanted to write about Padmasana, this is what came to his pen. And that's what he wrote. And now you cannot go and hang him or spank him and say, Svatmarama, you've been very messy. Please rewrite this Hatha Yoga Pradipika, because man, you write like you took it out of your ass. No? And therefore, the problem of this chaotic Indian style remains, but we today, when we look, we know he talks about Padmasana, but this is not Padmasana. So when he says, this is called Padmasana, which destroys the diseases of the practitioner. Yeah, well, maybe Baddha Padmasana with Jalandhara Bandha and with nasal Trataka has an effect of healing diseases. But can we say the same thing about the normal Padmasana? The simple, it's not simple, but let's call it the simple Padmasana? Not really. And that's how misunderstandings perpetuate and arise. In Agama, for example, we never go this way. We keep the yoga techniques separate from each other, and then when we have to mix 2 yoga techniques, we say it very clearly. This is this one mixed up with this one, and therefore the effects become combined, or the final effect is changed in this way and in that way, and all that. For example, Baddha Padmasana, because it acts upon the circulation of energy in a specific way, is famous in India and in yoga healing, in yoga for health, in healing yoga. It is famous that it's very good when you have a fever. Nobody can explain why it helps you to fight against a fever. When somebody has a flu or a high fever or an infection in the body or something, Baddha Padmasana indeed is a remarkable asana from the standpoint of the medical yoga. But the common Padmasana doesn't go there. Therefore, take it with a pinch of salt always. Study 2 times, read 3 times, and see what those people talk, because their texts are very convoluted. Sometimes they write from a higher state of consciousness, and they don't care about little details because they know what they are speaking about. And they say, well, if you really want to learn this thing, come to me. come and visit me and I will show you exactly, because maybe you didn't get it from the papers. The book is not meant to teach you yoga. The book is just meant to blow the whistle and to say, hey, hey, there is something super great for Hatha Yoga, and if you visit Svatmarama, you could learn it in great detail. And then, knowing that this is just a version, he gets better. In Sloka 45, he says, or place the feet upturned, which is exactly what's happening in the lotus pose. The feet seem to face up. Or place the feet upturned on the opposite thighs and place the palm turned upwards in the middle of the thighs. Here he describes the Buddha position of meditation. He doesn't go into details. What means place the palms upturned between the thighs? On your heels, on your ankles, closer to the body, one palm on top of each other, the fingers interlocked. These details you learn from Guru Svatmarama when you go to his ashram. He's not intending to sell yoga here. He's just informing you that there exists a Padmasana, which is actually Baddha Padmasana, and now in 45 he says, or place the feet upturned like this, and this also is Padmasana, but this one is a pure Padmasana, a much more pure Padmasana, with the hands in the Buddha position. And now he again botches it in 46, because he says, gaze at the tip of the nose and press the tongue against the root of the front upper teeth. Press the chin on the chest and slowly lift the wind upwards. Whoa! He gave me 4 additions to it. He says, gaze at the tip of the nose. So he says, do Padmasana with nasal Trataka. So nasal Trataka is something which you can do sitting on a chair or standing up. And the lotus pose is the lotus pose. They don't necessarily belong together. The lotus pose works on Ajna Chakra. The nasal Trataka has collateral effects on Muladhara Chakra. Why do I want to do an asana on Ajna Chakra and to introduce in it a concentration secondarily on Muladhara Chakra? There can be, I can find some justifications, but only in some very special cases for some very special needs. Otherwise, I don't. And therefore, putting the gaze at the tip of the nose is not really always done in the lotus pose. Only in special, press the tongue against the root of the front upper teeth. Hey. Here we have 3 degrees. Tongue, root upper teeth is right here. And then there is the vault of the palate, up. And then there is back towards the uvula, in the back of the throat, towards the back of the throat. Which one of these is intended? Because there is no real technique where you put the tongue on the root of the teeth. The tongue is either pressed up, and that is Jiva Bandha, the contraction of the tongue, or the tongue is pressed towards the back of the throat, towards the uvula, and that becomes the first stage of Kechari Mudra. And therefore, again, here he introduces a thing where he doesn't even mention it correctly. And then he says, press the chin on the chest, which is literally impossible. Some people, I told you once when we talked about it in one of the previous satsangs, that anatomists of yoga today say very clearly that there are 2 types of knees, there are 2 types of other articulations, and for example, when it comes to the throat, some people can touch the chin on the chest, and some people cannot, whatever they do. No? Because the neck has a different configuration. There are some people who have a swan-like neck, a long neck, which seems longer than usual. Those people, when they bend their neck, the chin is not as low as the chest. It cannot reach the chest. Therefore, they cannot. And then they should break their neck to be able to do this stunt. And of course, they are not supposed to do that. No? And that's why here symbolic language is used. Press the chin on the chest or whatever. And slowly lift the wind upwards. For the wind, the name which is used in the Sanskrit shloka is Pavana. Pavana doesn't mean literally wind, like the wind is blowing. Pavana is the Vedic god of the winds. The wind element, the wind as a phenomenon, as a nature's phenomenon, is governed by a god of the wind, which sometimes comes and destroys your house and destroys your crops and puts down whole forests when there is a storm or a tornado or something. And therefore that god is very feared and respected in India, because this pavana can make you homeless in 30 minutes and so on. And that's the god of the wind. So why don't they say here straightforward the wind? Because the guy is very smart. He wants to speak about an energy which is compared to the wind and which is not a physical energy, and which in yoga it's called prana. But then why doesn't he say, press the chin on the chest and slowly lift the prana upwards? Because it's too much. He is a tight-handed bastard, and he does not want to sell you the secret as easily. Then it's too much given to the outsiders. And therefore he feels like he wants to speak in a twilight language. He wants to speak in a colorful birds-like language where you understand or you don't really understand what he says. And then he says, sit there and lift your god of winds upwards, which means something which is not physical, because the god of the winds is not a physical person, is a spirit. So he means there is something in the wind which is the spirit of the wind, which is the subtle energy behind the wind, which is the prana vayu. And that prana vayu you are supposed to lift upwards. When I look at your faces in this room, I know that if I tell to some of you, please sit cross-legged, put your chin like this, and then lift the prana upwards, half of you would be confused. You say, but Swamiji, it's very easily said. How do you actually do it? Like if I do a pranayama, maybe I can do it. But it doesn't say anything about holding your breath or doing pranayama. If I have practiced the 5 actions, which is something which you study somewhere in the curriculum here in Agama, then if I have trained enough, I also understand what you are saying. But if I'm telling you, can you just sit and focus, and now please give me 5 minutes of lifting the prana. Like the reaction of many beginners is, beg your pardon? What? What are you talking about? No? Because beginners can't even feel their prana. And feeling it and taking control of it and then moving it deliberately through the body, this is a skill which comes with months and sometimes years of practice. And therefore, this is what you learn in Agama. When you do yoga for 6 months, you don't know if you really feel your chakras, or if you imagine your chakras, or if you just visualize your chakras, or if you learn something about the mantras of the chakras, and that is supposed to give a resonance along with the chakras, or if you go directly over the prana and then you start feeling some emotions, like more courage, more willpower, more unconditional love, more, I don't know, aesthetical sense and detachment and creativity. Those of you who know the chakras, you know what chakras I'm talking about, you know. And therefore, in the beginning, that's the big work of all the beginners who come to yoga. That these things should not be just a fairy tale for you, but they should be a reality that you do and that you feel. And therefore, when your teacher tells you sit there and slowly lift the wind, because there is a difference between quickly lifting the wind and slowly lifting the wind. It's a different motion of energy when you do it slowly or when you do like a rush of energy, like an electric shock through the body. No? And therefore, this is a process of learning. So this guy describes, and he gives 3 additions, 3 physical additions. Press the chin on the chest, put the tongue wherever, and so on. And then as you are in this composite position, this is not a pure Padmasana, it's a composite position derived from Padmasana, it's true. Then on top of it, you slowly lift the wind. Question, where to? Oh, I forgot to tell you, but I didn't want to tell you from the very beginning because it's just a book and you don't publish such shit in a book. You lift the wind to Ajna chakra in the middle of the forehead because that's where this composite posture is working on. So that's what it is working on. But why should I tell you when you just read the book? Come to my ashram and then I will tell you there when I'm face to face with you, and you can practice under my supervision. And therefore, here you have so many things between the lines. It seems like a simple text, but the fact that the yoga techniques are compositely arranged and mixed like this, and a lot of things are not told, it makes it that actually a simple description of Padmasana, almost every yoga book has a yogi sitting on Padmasana on the cover of the book, and so on. And that's emblematic. You do the lotus pose, you do yoga. And some people who really don't know shit about Asia, they will say sometimes, oh, are you a Buddhist? But doing Padmasana has nothing to do with Buddhism. And Buddha himself doesn't really do Padmasana. Maybe he was doing it in his lifetime, but on the statues of Buddha from Thailand, you don't see Buddhas in Padmasana. Sometimes on some Tibetan statues and on some Nepali statues and some North Indian statues, you see Buddhas in Padmasana. And that's because the yogis were sitting in Padmasana. And when the people looked at yogis, they say, this is how Buddha must have stayed. But we don't know that for a fact. No, so therefore, here there is a whole wide, very complex context about this. Anyway, after he describes this complex concatenation of techniques, there in the shloka number 47, he tells us, this is also called Padmasana, destroyer of all diseases. Wait, 2 times he described one, Pada Padmasana, and now this convoluted one. And for both of them, he insisted these ones are destroying all diseases. I mean, that's a very, very, very preposterous statement. Like, you could go to all the cancer associations in this world and say, look, I have 5 shlokas from an Indian text. We say you sit like this, it destroys all diseases. And that means yours is included. No? But who would bet on that? And which are the secrets which have not been told? And Svatmarama keeps them in his pocket for his personal disciples. And therefore, you always have to take these things with a pinch of salt, because the book is not intended as an initiation. This is also called Padmasana, destroyer of all diseases. He wants to say one thing, and that's the first thing. He doesn't say this is also Padmasana, the most aesthetically beautiful of all asanas. He says destroyer of all diseases. The question is, in what conditions? And if you don't do the Jalandhara Bandha, then it is still a destroyer of all diseases? Or that's the thing which comes up with this glorious aspect to it? And if you don't focus your eyes on the tip of the nose, will it still be destroyer of all diseases? Or what? Therefore, you have to pay a lot of Ajna Chakra discrimination and attention to such texts, because they are on purpose, they are written ambiguously, and there are many things which are not being told, while some powerful statements are there. It is difficult to attain by all on this earth, only the wise ones will get it. Do you think he means that you cannot keep the legs in the lotus? Maybe. Maybe for some people it is so difficult that they will try for 6 months. They will say, man, I got so much pain in my knees. I was limping when I was walking on the street. Fuck this Padmasana. It ruins my legs. I'm not made for it. It's not. Maybe some people will give it up because it's difficult to attain, like it requires a real stubborn and gradual, peaceful, friendly training. But actually, in a yogic language, the author says something else. Although I write about it in this book, 1 million people will hear about it, 100,000 will try it, 10,000 will persevere, and 1,000 will obtain great results. So how many people on planet Earth are doing a Super Padmasana? 1,000 out of 8 billion, because only 1 million heard about it to start with. And therefore he means there are karmic obstacles, there are karmic blockages. Not everybody will get to this one. And not because it's not there. It's there. But miraculously, 1,000 people will get to the top of it, and the others will kind of slide along it and not get it mysteriously. No? So he calls your attention. Says, here is Padmasana, destroyer of all diseases, but it's difficult to attain by everyone on this earth. Only the wise ones will get it. Which is a warning and a provocation. Are you among the 1,000 wise ones who does 1 hour of Padmasana every day? Then you are in that privileged elite of which Svatmarama speaks. Then he continues with another variation. Assume a firm Padmasana. Which one of the previous two? Or maybe now he actually speaks about the simple one, the pure one, just the legs and the palms, and forget about the Jalandhara, forget about the Trataka. Assume just a firm Padmasana, the simple, the original one, the root practice, and place the hands together on the lap. That's again the Buddha position. He doesn't mention if the fingers should be interlocked or on top of each other. Again, he never goes in such details, very, very seldom. Not because he cannot, but because he doesn't intend to teach yoga here. Here is just for him and advanced yogis to remember. There is also this version quoted by Svatmarama. No, it reminds me of it, but I know it from my guru. I don't know it from the book of Svatmarama. Press the chin on the chest. Oh, again, that's another Jalandhara Bandha. It's a very powerful technique, and it modifies the lotus pose. Is traditionally working on Ajna chakra. But in the moment when you do Jalandhara Bandha, there is a very powerful activation of Vishuddha chakra. So is this technique for Ajna, for Vishuddha, or for both of them, or for something else? He lost you already. You are lost in translation with this one, because he doesn't tell you such things. Press the chin on the chest, draw the Apana Vayu up, and push the Prana Vayu down, meditating on that, which means God, or in the Vedantic terminology, that's the syntagm or the synonym for God, for Brahman, for the Absolute. Tat, that. Yeah? And it's a very abstract word which designates a God which cannot be described. The God which cannot be described is Tat, that. No? But now some of you who did Kundalini program here in Agama, so even those of you who did a couple of seasons in Agama, you won't know this one. He says, draw the Apana Vayu up. Beg your pardon, what? What's Apana Vayu? How do I feel which one is Apana Vayu and which one is Prana Vayu? And how do I draw it up? No? And that, when you do Kundalini, you know what that means. And push the Prana Vayu down. Everybody who has done Kundalini in Agama knows that that is a very slippery and treacherous syntagm which is used for a process called Shakti Chalana Mudra, the first mudra which activates Kundalini, the process which awakens your Kundalini. And this Shakti Chalana Mudra is a very tricky thing which your guru shows you. When we teach it, we do it for people, we make it happen to people, like the teacher does it to the student first time, and then the students in 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, they become able to do it, and they know what it is. And we always laugh when a text tells us, put together the prana and the apana. Most people think it's a sort of a hocus pocus. It's not. It's a very clear, simple process by which something extremely obvious happens in your body and Kundalini is awakened and a lot of and when it happens, you know it. It's not just like, did I really manage this time to bring my prana and apana together? Nobody who does Shakti Chalana Mudra correctly asks that question, because it's very easy to find out. No? And that's why I say here he describes a process of Kundalini Yoga. He describes Shakti Chalana Mudra. You sit in the lotus pose, you do a Jalandhara Bandha, and then you unite prana with apana, which means Shakti Chalana Mudra, and at the same time you try to bring it to Sahasrara, because you meditate on God, on Brahman. It's a very convoluted process, and we have students in the school who can do that. I'm not saying they are perfect at it, but they can do it. They can practice it. No? And then it says do that and that and that and that. Thus, we are still in the Shloka 48. One awakens the Shakti. In the text, in the Sanskrit text, Kundalini is mentioned clearly, and reaches the highest enlightenment. So here he described a process of rising, awakening Kundalini, rising Kundalini in a sitting position, while you are in a sitting position in Sahasrara, and reaching states of Samadhi. Good luck with that. That's what we advise our students who studied Shakti Chalana Mudra. We want every student who studies the first month of Kundalini here in Agama, if you will study it, you will see, is given a tapas. Now we want you to do half an hour of this process every day, every day, every day, every day, until you become really good at it. So, I'm not saying the process is not possible. Here he describes something very esoteric, definitely which is advanced. Nobody reaches Kundalini program in Agama before they have done 23 levels of Agama, which usually are fulfilled in 4 seasons. So only when you have been 5 years in yoga, you do the Kundalini full on, and a teacher comes and touches you with a finger on your spine and awakens your Kundalini by teaching you this process of Shakti Chalana. And thus, here Svatmarama shows himself to be a true yogi. He knows what he is talking about. We can see that he doesn't want to describe it in detail. He tells you that he knows about it, and I can recognize that he knows what he is talking about. And still the outsiders, not because he is evil or wicked, but because it's something which could become dangerous, so the outsiders are not informed. The yogin sitting thus in Padmasana, so he means Padmasana with Kundalini Yoga, and restraining the wind, and here instead of the wind, the Sanskrit word which is used is another mythological word, but now he's not using Pavana. The tricky guy, he uses another word, and if you don't know all these words, you get lost. He uses Maruta, and Maruta is not the god, the Deva that governs the wind and the air element. Maruta are the spirits of the wind. They are very feisty, very shining warriors of the wind element, which are moving around, and sometimes they are putting down the trees, and whole forests go down because of the Marutas. So they are very boisterous spirits. But again, he uses a word which means spirit, invisible spirit. So when he says that you restrain the wind, you know, there are people who call the wind, and even in Hatha Yoga, the intestinal gas, Pavana Muktasana, the posture of releasing the wind. And releasing the wind means that you actually fart your heart off. You know, and it's releasing the wind. Here he says you restrain the wind, which means you don't belch and you don't fart. No, he doesn't have that into mind. Restraining the Marutas means that you control your prana. You hold your breath, and while you hold your breath and do Shakti Chalana, your prana is stable, fixed. You have full control of what's happening in your chakras. So he says a yogi doing this Shakti Chalana thing and restraining the subtle wind, the invisible wind, the Maruta, inhale through the tip of the nadis, is very tricky here. He says that you inhale the wind through the tip of your nadis. And there are two nadis here through which you inhale the prana, the marutas. But those of you who have learned pranayama in level 3 of agama, you know that actually when you do full retention and especially void retention, the prana is coming to you from all around, to the tip of your nadis, literally. And therefore he means something which only practitioners understand, that you are holding your breath, the inner energy is controlled, and yet you are connected with the cosmic energies in a process of resonance, because that's what the rising of Kundalini will do to you. That's what Shakti Chalana does to you. So the yogin sitting thus in Padmasana, doing Shakti Chalana, restraining the wind, inhale through the tip of the nadis, becomes liberated without a doubt. You don't need more than this. You have learned one technique for liberation. Actually, you've learned another one, because it told you that if you do Siddhasana for 12 years every day, you will reach enlightenment. That's one. And I even told you, he doesn't tell the length of time, but I can reveal it to you. 4 hours. Yeah, it's 3 hours and 48 minutes, but 4 hours. 4 hours of Siddhasana every day for 12 years. If you don't botch it with the food and others, if you don't lose your sexual energy and other stupid things like this, you will reach enlightenment. Here is another one. Sit in Padmasana, do the Shakti Chalana, the prana united with apana. When you understand what that is, you know what I'm talking about. Meditating on Brahman, controlling the prana so it doesn't chaotically go anywhere else, and you are receiving prana to the tip of the nadis, which means you are in a state of openness and resonance. The yogi who does this becomes liberated without a doubt. He doesn't say he becomes liberated. He becomes liberated without a doubt. Like Jesus, when he tells to people emphatically something and he says, truly, 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 I tell you that those of you who will do this will reach the kingdom of heaven, or whatever he says there. It's the equivalent here. They don't say truly, 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 I tell you that Padmasana does this. He says the one who does this becomes liberated without a doubt. Like, I'm telling this to you, it's 110% waterproof, guaranteed that it is so. And then he moves immediately to the next asana. He told us that the 4 most important asanas are Siddhasana, Padmasana. Everybody will agree with this, because these are the 2 most spectacular meditation, pranayama, kundalini postures of all yoga. And then the other 2 is because the other 2 are Simhasana, and the lion pose is very emblematic and but very few people would say, come on, man, you boil down all the asanas of yoga and one of the ones you boil down is Simhasana. I thought it would be Matsyendrasana or Paschimottanasana, or why Simhasana? And then the other one of them is Bhadrasana, which modern yogis call the butterfly, the blessed pose, the posture of the throne or of the blessing. And now he's going to describe those, and you are going to see those receive much less attention. He took the shlokas 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, and 49 to describe Padmasana, 5 shlokas, 6 shlokas, and let's see how much he gives to Simhasana, starting with shloka number 50. Place the ankles crossed under the scrotum, on the sides of the perineum, the left ankle on the right side and the right one on the left side. It sounds difficult to understand. When you look at a picture of Simhasana, you understand immediately. It's a weird position in which you cross your legs like this under you. It's like you'd be sitting in the Japanese way, but you cross your ankles under your perineum, so it's a bit of a more weird way of sitting. Place the hands on the knees, spreading out the fingers. There is a version where it's done with the fingers spread like this. Open the mouth wide, but he doesn't tell us anything about the tongue and the contraction of the throat, because those are details which you learn from a guru. And gaze at the tip of the nose with a well-concentrated mind. There is a Simhasana which is done with the nose, and there is a Simhasana more spiritual which is done with putting the eyes up here in the forehead, and we generally prefer that one here in Agama. 52, the third shloka consecrated to this. This is Simhasana, held in high esteem by the greatest yogins. This excellent asana facilitates or connects the three bandhas. He told us it's excellent, it's esteemed by all the yogis. So what is Simhasana good for? In Hatha Yoga, we know that it's even good for healing the throat when you have a sore throat. Together with the kriyas, with salt water and gargling salt water and doing the shoulder stand, the Sarvangasana, one of the best asanas for dealing with a sore throat during a flu or other processes is Simhasana. He doesn't give a dime on that effect of Simhasana. Forget about that. He says this is held in high esteem by the greatest yogis, and it connects or facilitates the three bandhas. The three bandhas are Mula Bandha, Uddiyana Bandha, and Jalandhara Bandha, and they are the three fundamental instruments for facilitating the awakening and the rising of Kundalini Shakti again. And therefore, basically, he tells me, if you do a lot of Simhasana, Kundalini Yoga becomes easier. You will feel more comfortable. Some opening is there already. And with Simhasana, you will succeed faster with Mula Bandha, Jalandhara Bandha, and Uddiyana Bandha. That's the effect. So he used 3 shlokas for Simhasana. And he goes directly into the last, and it will be the last asana. Until the end of the first chapter, he will focus on a different topic. But first, Bhadrasana. Place the heels under the perineum, each one on its respective side. Literally, the text says it in a clumsy way, but in English it's more elegant to say the way I said it, because literally he says the right to the right side and the left to the left. No? That basically means each foot stays on its side, unlike in the lion pose, where they are crossed and the right foot was coming to the left side and vice versa. So he says here you place the heels under the perineum. I'm telling you, what he's talking about is that you bring the heels under the perineum and you do a butterfly with your knees. Hold firmly the feet with the hands and sit tight or motionless. So you have to sit up nicely. This is Bhadrasana, the destroyer of all diseases. Again, are these people crazy and they smoke too much marijuana? And then they say this is the most excellent asanas, the destroyer of all diseases. Or they speak metaphorically, because in certain conditions, when you rise Kundalini, well, then of course every disease can disappear from your body. But it's not as simple as that. So that's why always take it with a pinch of salt. There are many things which he didn't tell about it. So he says you do this butterfly thing. This is Bhadrasana, the destroyer of all diseases. The Siddha yogins call this also Gorakshasana. That's not true in the chaotic part of India. Take a good book of yoga and look and see what's the difference between Bhadrasana and Gorakshasana. Goraksha was a great yogi, disciple of Matsyendra. He is the second biggest guru in the lineage. The first guru of Hatha Yoga is Matsyendra, and the second biggest guru is Goraksha. While Matsyendra never wrote anything, Goraksha actually wrote the very first text in the history of Hatha Yoga, a text which is very little known, and it's not one of the big three. It's called Goraksha Sataka, and the translations of it are extremely rare. And this Goraksha had a favorite asana. His guru Matsyendra was sitting in Matsyendra asana, which is a super difficult asana. Goraksha was also sitting in an asana, and it is not less difficult. It's an asana where you don't keep the feet under the perineum. You basically turn the feet like this under the perineum. You twist your legs like you want to twist your ankles completely and break them. Very few people are elastic enough and thin enough in their legs to do that. And that's why to say, but this is also called Gorakshasana. No, I beg to differ. Gorakshasana is another thing, considerably more difficult than Bhadrasana, and just stating such things, you just promote confusion. It's confusion of names. This asana eliminates the fatigue experienced in asanas and bandhas. Here, there is a very big ambiguity of this text, and I quoted for you the opinion of most translators and Sanskritologists. The last sentence which I read to you, it's not the shloka number 54, but it is the first verse from the shloka number 55. In the language of Sanskritology, this will be called 55a, and the second line is called 55b. Sometimes the yoga texts are written in such a way that if they need half of a shloka more to say something, they don't bother. They just go and swallow half of the next shloka, and then in the middle of the next shloka on 55b, they start a completely different subject. No, it's not forbidden. It would be preferable to keep shloka and subject. But in the world of yoga, why should they bother with such silly rules of editing texts? Well, their purpose is not to edit texts, to be editors. It's just that they want to communicate the science of yoga in their own acception without too much fuss. And therefore, it's like this. It says in 53, place the feet under the perineum, hold the feet, sit up straight. This is Bhadrasana, the destroyer of all diseases. And the Siddha yogis call this also Gorakshasana, which is very confusing because it's not true per se. It may be true for Svatmarama, but today in the modern repertoires of yoga, that's not the case. When you make a roster of asanas and of names, Gorakshasana is Gorakshasana and Bhadrasana is Bhadrasana. And then there comes 55a. I also forgot to tell you, this asana eliminates the fatigue experienced in asanas and bandhas, because it's an asana which works on Muladhara and which calms down the mind and the energy, and you can do the square pranayama, the samavriti pranayama, and it's a very stable asana, and you sit in it and it kind of rests you and recharges you and re-energizes you. But this sentence can be separated, and we can consider that the author wanted to say something else in 55a and b. Therefore, he does not speak about Bhadrasana. He changed the subject, and therefore it will say asanas. By asanas, you have to do asanas until you have no more fatigue in asanas and bandhas, which is also true. Asanas, says Patanjali, have to be relaxed and easy, comfortable, no? And therefore he says the same thing in another way. And in 55b, he continues by saying, thus, one must first focus on the purification of the nadis, on mudras and pranayama. So basically he finished with Bhadrasana, and then he says practice asanas until they are relaxing and you don't feel tired in them, even with the bandhas. And therefore first one must focus on purification of the channels, on the mudras, on pranayama, which is a sort of a general advice. So this has a double entendre. It means Bhadrasana is told by Svatmarama that it eliminates fatigue from asanas and bandhas, or it can simply change subject and say, okay, now that I spoke about Bhadrasana, let me draw some conclusions. When you do practice of asanas, do them until there is no more fatigue in your asanas and bandhas. And first, you must focus on the purification of the nadis, mudras, and pranayama. This is Hatha Yoga, my dear friends. You have to do Hatha Yoga without tiredness. You have to do the bandhas. You have to get to Kundalini. You have to focus on the purification of the nadis, on mudras, on pranayama. Svatmarama is so tricky, he doesn't even use the Sanskrit word pranayama. He says purification of nadis, he says mudras, and instead of pranayama, he uses a syntagm which means the same, but which only connoisseurs will know. He says you should practice pavana kriya. Pavana is the name of the wind god, and it means prana. It means the invisible part of the wind, the invisible part of the air. And he doesn't call it yama, prana yama. He calls it pavana kriya, because kriya is also an active technique. It's a purification. He says prana kriya or prana yama. If you are a total outsider, or if you are a big beginner, you will not understand these subtleties, what he's saying, because he basically says what should be done first. First, purify your nadis, because if you want to go to advanced yoga with impure nadis, you are going to destroy yourself in the process. Purify the nadis, do mudras, do pranayama. There should be no more tiredness when you do asanas and bandhas. This is how you start yoga. We find many people who are impatient to do all sorts of wild things. Don't worry. In 1 year, in 2 years, depending on your speed, you can do very wild things in Hatha Yoga. But you always start with the beginning. That's the beginning. He even takes it once more and he describes the path, what I can call the path of Hatha Yoga Pradipika. It's not exactly how is the path of Agama. They run parallel, because in Agama we use many other techniques as well. In a certain way, Hatha Yoga Pradipika is poor, because it gives 16 asanas, a few pranayamas, a few mudras, some subtle processes of concentration of the mind. In Agama you learn 3 times more techniques in each category, 5 times more techniques in each category. I'm not saying that we are smarter than the Hatha Yoga Pradipika or than Svatmarama, or that we are better yogis here. I'm simply saying that Agama has a method which is much more encyclopedic, much more rich. You have many more techniques here, but the spirit remains the same. Listen to what he has to say in 56. Shloka 56. Asanas, kumbhakas, various techniques called mudras, and then the inner audition of the nada, which has a very specific name in Hatha Yoga Pradipika. It's called nada anusandana. It means listening to the inner sound. This is the correct sequence of practice in Hatha Yoga. So let's listen to it again. Asanas, kumbhakas. What is kumbhaka? Kumbhaka, in case you don't remember, even advanced students don't remember, kumbhaka means when you hold your breath. And basically is a syntagm or a simile for pranayama. It means techniques where you hold your breath. Therefore, it means pranayama. So asanas, pranayama, mudras, and then the inner audition of the nada. This is the correct sequence. So you don't practice mudras before the asanas. You don't practice the inner sound before pranayama. The correct sequence according to Svatmarama, and he is an authority, he is one of the big authorities in history, is this: asanas, after asanas pranayamas, after pranayamas mudras. It's true, there are mudras which we teach also later, because they are kundalini mudras, but at least some mudras. I'm just thinking about Ashvini mudra or others. They are mudras. And finally, the fourth step, the inner sound, listening to the nada. Very few of you know, and those of you who did level 4 of Agama, you know it already. Maybe it doesn't work well for you and you are still struggling with it, because it's mostly a technique for auditory yogis. And this shows to me that Svatmarama was a very auditory yogi, because on the spiritual level, he did not choose a visual technique like Taraka Yoga. He chose an auditory technique, which is called Nada Anusandana, listening to the nada. And nada, just to cut the long story short, it means that yogis, when they do some yoga techniques, they suddenly start hearing a crazy sound inside their head, which goes like this. And it can drive you crazy if you don't know what it is. Because you say, what, did I go crazy? No. You are hearing what Svatmarama heard hundreds of years ago, that when you purify your nadis and increase your vitality and open your Vishuddha beyond a certain level, then you have access to energies by hearing their sound of resonance, exactly as you'll hear tuning forks in your head, or as you'll hear a harpsichord, a lyra, the Greek instrument with chords. Pinch a chord and it goes ping, or like the sounds produced by these ones in Tibet, especially in Nepal, partly in India as well. And therefore, there is a process by which you can hear inner sounds. And if you realize that you are not sick in your head and it's not a disease, then you can focus on those sounds and you can get somewhere. We teach that in the technique of Laya Yoga with mantras, and it is the sister of the Nada Anusandana. In Hatha Yoga Pradipika, they teach a similar thing, slightly different. Very, very instructive. Very, very instructive. So he tells you asanas, pranayama, mudras, with which comes the rising of Kundalini, and then Nada Anusandana, when you hear this sound ringing in your head. People would say, but what if you cannot hear this sound? But then there must be an equivalent which is visual, like Taraka Yoga, for those of you who know that name, and there is an equivalent which is kinesthetic, which is in the Shakti Chalana Mudra and other forms of body-oriented Kundalini Yoga. And therefore, he already told you the line. He says, by the way, now that I finished the asanas, remember, the correct order in my method, in the method of Svatmarama, is asanas, pranayama, mudras, which bring about the rising of Kundalini, and then Nada Anusandana, which sends you to Samadhi. That's it. Agama completely acknowledges this, but our method is more colorful because we have other techniques to teach. And as you can see, I have an alternative already for those of you who are not auditory people and cannot hear the nada. I have students who tried to listen to the nada for 2 years and they still can't hear it. And I'm working on props for them, but still we have found the ultimate solution. And therefore, for such people, they do auditory things or kinesthetic things to compensate for the fact that simply they are not the same typology of a human being as Guru Svatmarama was. You don't have to be like Guru Svatmarama. You just have to practice the science of yoga. And after now he gives general advice. He says you should not have tiredness, focus on the purification of the nadis, mudras, pranayama. The order, by the way, is asanas, pranayamas, mudras, and then Nada Anusandana. And then he gives further general advice. Shloka 57. One who practices Brahmacharya. Of all the things, he chose Brahmacharya. He basically says, if you chaotically discharge your sexual energy, you are doing yoga and you will get 1% results. You will not know why it doesn't work. Therefore, Brahmacharya, he doesn't say one who practices ahimsa. Of course, ahimsa is very important, because if you break ahimsa, which means non-violence, then you are going to create violent karma, and the violent karma will bite you in the ass sooner or later, and it will kill you or maim you or handicap you or stop you, and then your yoga is finished in this lifetime. Of course, ahimsa is very important, but when he comes here, he wants to describe the efficient process, like you sit every day and you do Hatha yoga, and the first thing which comes to his mind, he says, one who practices Brahmacharya. Moderation in diet is a word which I never heard anywhere else outside, because others preach moderation in diet, but they use other words. Here he uses a word which is rare, which is called mitahara, and which is unique to this text. Moderation in diet. That means if you practice Hatha yoga and if you eat half of a pig roasted every day, your yoga will go to the dogs. You will not get the expected results. So you need to fulfill some conditions on top of just doing yoga. One who practices Brahmacharya, moderation in diet, and renunciation. Renunciation is the famous word tyaga, which is equivalent to aparigraha, which means practice detachment. He asks Brahmacharya and detachment, the fourth yama and the fifth yama, the most difficult of the yamas. Doesn't even mention the first three. Because if you practice Brahmacharya and you practice a good diet, but you are a very attached person, you are going to develop visions, you are going to develop siddhis, paranormal powers, you are going to become very strong, and you are going to maybe go to hell because of that. And therefore, it's not enough to practice Brahmacharya and a good diet. There is one third condition. You have to be detached. Detached in a very, very short explanation, because detachment is a whole lecture which we give here in Agama in the level 1, the grand lecture about aparigraha. It's such an amazing spiritual value, but detachment means not to get attached too much to the things of this life, not to get attached to money, to richness, to other people, to relationships, to honor, to glory, to fame and name, and a lot of other things. Because with those, you can be manipulated by the dark side of the force. You can be blackmailed. You can be pushed. And then you are not free. You imagine that you are free. A yogi who practices Brahmacharya and practices a lot and practices moderation in diet can become a deity, can even become a titan or an asura, but will not become a Buddha because of lacking tyaga, lacking detachment. Without detachment, you can't get yourself free. Every religion preaches detachment. You want to go to God, you have to let go of the produce of God. The produce of God is this universe with its Maya. When you want to go to God, you have to change your target. I'm not focused on the world, I'm focused on the master of the world. No? And therefore, he says, one who practices Brahmacharya, moderation in diet, and renunciation, practicing yoga intensely, attains success after 1 year without any doubt. Success here, it does not mean necessarily perfection, although he uses the word siddhi. I have not known anybody in history or in my lifetime who practiced yoga so perfectly that they reach some sort of perfection in Hatha yoga in 1 year. Nobody. I have not seen one single person in this way, nor read about them, nor saw a video movie about them, nor anything. I've seen people becoming really good at Hatha Yoga and Kundalini Yoga in a matter of 2, 3, 4, 6 years. But the text says that in 1 year you will reach success, which means you will be a teacher. If I see you in that condition, I look at you and say, man, you should become a teacher. I want to anoint you as a teacher. People say, but Swamiji, what about the levels? What about the sashes? What about the, I don't know, the years of seniority? I don't care. If I see you close to perfection, you are a teacher. No? I remember similar stories from the world of martial arts. I knew a little girl in Denmark when I was living in Denmark. She was practicing Aikido, and she went to 2 camps with a big master from Japan. He organized international camps, and in one camp when he saw her, he simply said, you, what is your name? Come here. He said, you have the black hagama. Hagama, they don't have belts in Aikido, they have a skirt. And those who have the black skirt is the equivalent of the black belt. You don't get so easily a black belt. This girl practiced 2 years. She was so splendidly practicing. She did 5 hours per day in her house. And she had reached, without realizing, a great harmony in movements, a great balance, she was really good. And the big guru like that one, he just saw her and he said, you. He didn't even know her name. And he said, you, black hagama. No, like this. A guru can do that. And that's what Svatmarama tells you. Have a good diet. Hold your brahmacharya. Be detached. Don't focus on other people's sandwiches or money or whatever they have. Let go. And do yoga diligently. Practice yoga intensely. They use a word which means practice, practice, practice. Not just every 5 days I remember to do a bit of yoga. Practice yoga intensely. Then you attain success after 1 year. Again, without any doubt. So everybody can be really good at Hatha Yoga if for 1 year they fulfill those 4 conditions. Brahmacharya, persevering practice, good diet, and last but not least, detachment. Be detached. Don't give a damn about the whole thing. Focus on your yoga. Focus on your goal. Focus on your dream. 1 year is very little. I'm telling you, I don't know anybody in my life or in the stories about great yogis who was perfect in 1 year. This is why this can be an optimistic evaluation. But I did see people who are practicing hours of Hatha Yoga every day, and then Kundalini and everything, in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, you could take off your hat in front of them. They were really good at Hatha Yoga. They had success. You could say this is a successful Hatha Yogi, definitely. And now there comes a part, I don't know how much I will reach, I will maybe just start it. There comes a very interesting part. Gheranda Samhita speaks a little bit about the same, but much less. Shiva Samhita doesn't speak at all. And Hatha Yoga Pradipika is the text of yoga which is closest of all of them to the sister of Hatha Yoga, which is Ayurvedic medicine. Like they speak also about the first part, which is health. And that's why he focuses on diet. And not only, but first of all on diet. Gheranda Samhita says, you should eat this, 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 you should not eat this, this, that. They have a couple of shlokas focused on that. But there are here more than 2 shlokas on that. And it's the text which insists most. That is why the Hatha Yoga Pradipika has been provided in the end by Svatmarama with an extra chapter which most of the Sanskritologists never translate because it's very little known, which is about healing diseases with Hatha Yoga. It's the medical part of Hatha Yoga. Hatha Yoga Pradipika is the best, and it's related to what I start reading now in the shloka number 58. Just for your information, this first chapter finishes at the shloka 67. So there are 9 or 10 shlokas left. So in 10 shlokas, it will tell us about diet and about other things, and it will still have time to exalt the practical yogis in the last 3 shlokas. So it goes very quickly. They don't waste time. They tell you clear-cut things. Of course, you will not know all the details, and then the rest you learn from the guru. Here is just like a draft. It's just like a bullet points. It's a simplified roster of what they are trying to teach. 58. Moderation in diet or mitahara is defined as taking food which is tasty, and the word used is madhura. Madhu means honey. So madhura means sweetish also. Also, when a person is very kind, that is called madhura bhava. It means to have a loving attitude. It means to be honeyed. And therefore, he says, one should eat food which is sweetish, madhura. Like, for example, when you eat wheat, it's sweetish. When you eat rice, it's sweetish, especially if that rice was boiled in milk, like the famous Indian kheer. No? Then it's sweetish. And guess what? Many people say, man, this is baby food. The yogis are just big babies, as you will find from this text. They most of the time eat baby food. And one thing which I am telling you from now, so that you know it, the description of what he gives is almost crystal clear, kapha food from Ayurveda. And he contra-advises pitta food and vata food bitterly. Why was this? The yogis of India were generally beggars. They were not farmers or producers of food. So first of all, they were eating little food. There have been yogis who lost their detachment and they just got greedy and they stuffed their faces and they became fat as pigs. Swami Shivananda's pictures are eloquent about how a yogi can look a bit piggish, and so did Sri Yukteswar, and so did Paramahamsa Yogananda, and so did I 15 years ago. You know, so it's like we all know we go through certain stages of life where we may love food too much, and then it's too much kapha. But the normal yogi is a Svatmarama, is a yogi who is eating out of begging. And therefore he is eating little. And when you eat little, and you eat strictly vegetarian food, you don't eat eggs, you don't have any other source of protein. Remember, in India, they did not have soya protein or this. They were having some beans, some grams, some pulses, but not much. Their only sources of proteins were in milk products, in dairy products, especially in milk and butter. Therefore, you are going to see that very significantly, he is preaching all the time kapha food. Because when you live in a tropical climate, and there is scorching sun, which most of India is, and you eat little and not luxurious food, you are not having dal makhani. No? Like even Swami Rama, in the beginning of the 20th century, who lived in Uttarkashi, higher than Rishikesh on the valley of the Ganges, like 100 kilometers up from Rishikesh. Uttarkashi is already a wild place, wild up in the mountains. And he says, in that ashram, they had very little food which came from donations, and basically their daily food was rice with dal, rice with lentils, which in India is a mixture called khichdi. You boil rice together with lentils, and the lentils and the rice have a little bit of proteins, a little bit of fats, some minerals and so on. That was their food. And he said, don't imagine that we had butter. We had butter 3 times per year. When there was a festival in Uttarkashi, and then a lot of guests came, and a lot of money and donations came together with that, and then the ashrams could afford to buy ghee. But otherwise, ghee was like, ho, 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 it's carnival food when you have ghee. And therefore, when you are like that, your body is longing for kapha food, because your food is a bit too vata, too poor. The climate is pitta. And then if you get to do 100 Uddiyana bandhas per day and 100 naulis per day, your fire is going through the roof. And the typical such yogi would be skinny, with hungry eyes like a wolf. And for such a person, you always recommend butter, milk, kapha food, because that's what they need. But when you have a yogi who is lazy and doesn't work on Manipura and doesn't have a powerful inner fire, and they stagnate a lot of energy in their Muladhara and Svadhisthana, and their ass is as big as the ass of a dinosaur, and their Manipura is dead, if you give them this kind of food, you bury them into the earth. So to such yogis, you need to give some chili and some other thing, because they are not like Svatmarama. You have to understand this in the context. Who were these yogis? What was their daily practice? Dhirendra Brahmachari says, if you do more than 30 minutes of Shirshasana per day, try to evaluate. I'm not asking you to tell me how many people in this room have ever in their life for 1 month done 30 minutes of headstand every day or more, 45 minutes, 60 minutes, Maybe nobody. And then Dhirendra Brahmachari is speaking about a city in China. Who has been there? But Dhirendra Brahmachari has probably done that when he was young, and probably he had colleagues of his guru or his guru who was doing that. I had a guru when I was young who was put in prison by the communist police, and the only practice which he could do in prison was Shirshasana. And he did Shirshasana with chains on his ankles. He was chained with a heavy chain from one leg to the other because he was a danger for escape. He had escaped from prison once upon a time, and now they put him in chains. And with chains, with heavy chains on his legs, he was going on the headstand, and he was doing 1.5 hours in the morning and 1.5 hours in the evening. This man was doing 3 hours of Shirshasana every day. So there are people who know what Dhirendra Brahmachari is talking about. Yeah? And Dhirendra Brahmachari says, if you ever go to more than 30 minutes of Shirshasana, then you should drink milk. You should eat butter, lots of it, because inside your body there is going to be so much sublimation and so much fire that otherwise you will get skinny and die and become too vata, too pitta. But how many people go from the elephant ass to 3 hours of Shirshasana per day? Like putting the hourglass the other way around, like turn the tables on it. Most of our people are comfortable. Let's sleep a little bit more. Svatmarama was doing 100 Uddiyana bandhas or whatever, Then for these people, obviously you need milk and butter, but take it with a pinch of salt. And therefore, he all the time preaches food, which is kapha. Don't get surprised of this, because in the scorching tropical sun of India, with 1 hour of headstand per day, that's what you need. When you do 320 pranayamas per day, this is your diet, otherwise you die. You wither like a flower without water. And therefore, take it in the right context. Moderation in diet is defined as taking food which is tasty in the meaning of sweetish, Doesn't mean sugar. It means sweetish, like wheat. When you chew on wheat, well, it becomes sweetish in your mouth because of the gluten. And unctuous, some people say, I have gluten allergy. Do 1 hour of headstand per day, and on top of it, you do 320 pranayamas, and when you get bored, you do also 100 Uddiyana Bandhas and the 100 Naulis. You will not have any gluten allergy. Your gluten allergy is too much kapha on Muladhara. Put your ass to work, run 42 kilometers every day, and the gluten allergy will be burned by the physical effort. No? And therefore, take it with a pinch of salt always. So he says, tasty, sweetish diet, and unctuous, which is given by the Sanskrit word susnigdha, which means fatty, or more precisely, rich in ghee. He says, eat a food which is juicy with ghee, musty with ghee, which is oozing ghee. Why? Because your brain is 80% fat. And if you don't eat fat, your brain and your nervous system will go to the dogs. If you have the ass of the elephant, you already have too much fat in your body. You measure your cholesterol, and it's 500 instead of what it should be. No, then you don't need unctuous food. But for the yogis from India who are eating khichdi 300 days per year, and meanwhile doing 1 hour of headstand and 300 pranayamas, they had to eat sweetish and unctuous, sweetish and oily, fatty food. Of course, they were not eating any other fat except ghee and the original butter itself. And he says, what's moderation in diet? Eat this sweetish, unctuous food, leaving 1/4 of the stomach free and offering it to please Shiva. Leaving 1/4 free, which means you never fill up your stomach. It's a rule, don't eat until you burst. I've eaten so much. Don't. Make an effort of willpower to stand up while you are still a little bit hungry. Make a pile on the table and compare it with the size of your body and stomach. And say, what is here? Is it approximately like 3/4 of my stomach? Yes. If not, look to an anatomy atlas and see how big the stomach is compared to the size of the body. And then put that on the table and say, I'm eating this and nothing else. Actually, the commentator, Brahmananda, there is a commentator in the medieval times who made some very, very brief commentaries to the text of Svatmarama. Here he comes with a useful and nice commentary. He said what Svatmarama means is this: fill up your stomach half with food, 1/4 with water, because the water will dissolve the food and it will make it semi-liquid so that it can move in the stomach easily and be digested, mixed with digestive enzymes, and leave 1/4 free, so that in that 1/4 there is some air, there is some gas, because that gas also has a chemical function in the digestion. So it says your digestion oven, the bun in the oven, has to be half food, 1/4 water, and the rest air or whatever gas is in the stomach. That's the perfect chemistry for a good meal. Then, when you finish digesting that after 3 hours, 4 hours, then you can decide to take one more meal. But each meal should be relatively small. Half food, 1/4 water, 1/4 empty with air. How many people do I know who do this? Very few. We are all pigs. When we eat, we eat. We make a Christmas party or we make a movie night and we stuff our faces until we start burping. No? Who eats the yogic way? Because we live in luxury. Those people were Spartans. They were stoic people living in very austere conditions, and they really did yoga. That's why modern yoga and Svatmarama's yoga are sometimes miles apart, and some things still can be done, but you have to understand the differences very well to know where to press, what to do, what needs to be compensated. So he says, moderation in diet, I mean eat clean kapha food, not too much. And then he says, the last, which is very important, and offering it to please Shiva. It's what we teach in the first level. Everybody knows. Very few people do it directly. That means you consecrate your food. Before you eat, every time you consecrate. In India, it's clear. How do you consecrate? You offer it to please Shiva. You say, now I eat for Shiva. Now Shiva is eating through my body and through my mind. This act of eating is given to Shiva. I eat together with Shiva. I eat to nourish my body, but I'm also eating together with God. Therefore, offer the act of eating, offering it, says he here, to please Shiva. Why Shiva? Because Shiva is the Guru. Shiva is the Guru of the Gurus. And therefore, when you do yoga, Shiva is shining the most bright. And in 59, let me just go. It's a very long and difficult shloka, so I will start, and then when you think I've finished it, I'll finish. But then next time when I start, I'll get back to it. Then he says, he told you what moderation in diet is, and now he's going to tell you what not to eat, and then what to eat. Shloka number 59, he says, the following types of food should be avoided. Again, I'm telling it, take it with a pinch of salt, because this is valid for Svatmarama and his ashram. Other people might need some of the things mentioned here as medicine, as Ayurvedic medicine, and you'll see in a second what I mean. He says the following types of food should be avoided. Bitter. He says don't eat bitter shit. Food should be sweetish and fatty with ghee. Nothing bitter there. If you make a kheer or if you make a butter, a rice with ghee, there's nothing bitter in that shit. Bitter should, but what about coffee? Yeah, it's bitter. It's not on the list of Svatmarama. It's on the black list of Svatmarama. You know what the example typical which is given, because he actually gives an example. He illustrates this with one name of a plant. It's very difficult to translate because plants have 10 different names in 10 different parts of India. But the one which he gives here for bitter is, for example, bitter gourd. It's a form of, it's Momordica charantia. It's the bitter gourd. You find it in Tesco and in a macro as a big cucumber-like thing with stripes on it, along it, and so on. Guess what? The bitter gourd is one of the most recommended food medicines for diabetes. When you have a high blood sugar, bitter gourd is a must, is what relieves you. But guess what? Svatmarama or his disciples never had diabetes. Why? Because they didn't have fat on their belly. Diabetes comes when you put fat on your pancreas and on your inner organs in the abdomen. When you do 100 naulis per day and you eat a little bit of khichdi, there will be no diabetes in your village. There will be no diabetes in your ashram. And then when you eat bitter gourd, it's a bit too much. It decreases your blood sugar so much that you could go into a hypoglycemic crisis and start shaking. And therefore, for Svatmarama, bitter gourd is a no-no. But for a modern yogi that has some diabetes, bitter gourd is actually recommended. That's how you should be able to have the discrimination to understand what the Svatmarama tells you here. Because it's from case to case. For some people, it's exactly the other way around. He says sour. Don't eat sour food. And he gives here the example of amla or the different mirobalans, like emblic mirobalam, kebulic mirobalam, and I don't know which. These are three of the most famous Ayurvedic plants of India, amla included. And in India, the Ayurvedic doctors, they sell jars in which they pickle the amla. The amla are like small apples, and they are pickled, and you have to take one every day at every meal, and it's sour, terribly sour. It's really like you eat raw lemon or something like this, and it's very good for people who have too much kapha. It increases your pitta. People who have low digestive fire are told to eat amla and other mirobalans. But Svatmarama was eating khichdi and doing 300 pranayamas per day. He didn't have a problem with the digestive fire. His problem was that his digestive fire was getting too much, and he was burning from inside and losing weight. And therefore, he says, don't eat bitter, like the bitter gourd. Don't eat sour things like the amla. Don't eat spicy. And the example which he gives is pepper, black pepper. But again, in Ayurveda, they use black pepper like crazy sometimes. Very healthy for some people who need spiciness, but not for Svatmarama. Salty. With the salty, almost all the yogis agree. Swami Shivananda, who was a medical doctor before he turned into a yogi, he illustrates it very clearly. He says simple medical research says that a human being in India, of course, where he lived, is eating about 200 times more salt than a mountain gorilla. Like, we talk about a big animal, much heavier than a human being, and they eat 200 times less salt. There is some salt included in the leaves of and in some fruits. There is some organic natrium chloride, but it's 200 times less than what humans eat. Now, Shivananda says, maybe we are smarter than them, maybe we live longer than them, maybe our metabolism is different, but not 200 times over. 200 times over shows that we simply eat too much salt. And we are addicted to it. I myself am a person who loves salt. It's very difficult. I can easily refrain from bitter gourd, but from salt, it's like, oh boy, and 200 times more. Shivananda says, basically, you should never add any salt. Like, you shouldn't have a salt jar by which you add salt. You should take only the salt which is already in the food and never add a pinch of salt to anything, because that's already too much. That's, again, as you can see, how Spartan this diet is. So, no bitter, no sour, no spicy, no salty, no heating, which is called in Ayurveda usna, which means food which makes you burn inside, food which makes you sweat from inside. The best example being the juice of the sugar cane, which they sell in India on the street. Svatmarama says sugar cane juice is not for the yogis, because you are going to drink a glass and then you are going to have so much fire inside. God knows if you get sick or if you start doing something stupid because of too much heat inside your body. No heating food. Some green leaves, and here he is very twisted, because they love vegetables like spinach and kale and other Indian green vegetables. But they speak about betel leaves, which is the poison of India, the drug, the preferential drug of India, betel leaves, because it's a green leaf. People say, hey, it's a leaf. I'm eating leaves. Yeah, but betel leaves, here in Thailand, you would also speak about marijuana. And they are all green leaves, but they are not green leaves for yogis. So some green leaves, which are betel, marijuana, and others, fermented gruel. When you prepare rice, the water from the rice in tropical climate, in 12 hours it starts fermenting, So you can even make rice made out of wine. Wine made out of rice, like the sake in India, in Japan. And thus, fermented rice is a semi-alcoholic drink, like the Russian kvass and other such things. And it's a no-no for Svatmarama. No fermented gruel or rice water. Till oil and seeds. For those of you who don't know the slang, in India, till oil is a name for sesame oil. So he's not very happy about sesame oil and seeds. But Giorgio Shava was frying the sesame seeds with salt, by the way, with a lot of salt, and he was preparing gomasio. And he said gomasio can help you heal cancer. So should you eat sesame seed? When you live in the ashram of Svatmarama, you shouldn't. But in other conditions, you might need to. That's why I'm saying you cannot apply these things literally. You have to see what fits and where. Till oil and seeds. Mustard. In India, the mustard is not prepared like in Dijon. It's prepared with yellow stuff, with vinegar. In India, the mustard is just mustard seeds, yellow mustard seeds or black mustard seeds. So they don't like it, it's too fiery. Alcohol in general. Fish, generally in Hindu India, fish is a no-no. Meat is on the no-no list. Curds and buttermilk. I have read the Hatha Yoga Pradipika commentary of Bihar School of Yoga, and they say that it refers to another formula of buttermilk or curd than it is done in Western dairy industry. And that's why Swami Vishnu Devananda, who lived in Canada, he said, no, it's not the curd that you buy in a supermarket in Canada. That one is perfectly okay. There is a curd made in India according to some strange rules, which I did not look further for explanation, but that one, he didn't like it, Svatmarama. So that's all. Horse gram, a special gram, a special purse. Jujube, it's a sour fruit again. He doesn't like that, the fruit of the jujube. Oil cakes, which are the cakes which are obtained when you squeeze sesame or sunflower seeds, and then you get the oil out of it, and then you get this thing which looks like a cake, and which people use in Turkey, for example, for making halva out of it. Those cakes of concentrated fatty things, they are too much for Svatmarama, oil cakes. Asafoetida, which is the famous hing, is this super stinky spice of India. A bit of it stinks like it pushes you out of the house. It's really a stinky spice. Asafoetida, it's a sulfurous salt. Garlic, etc. So even garlic, although generally it's not forbidden in yoga, and it's one of the Ayurvedic famous plants for healing, nevertheless for Svatmarama, garlic is a no-no. These people were living very sattvically, very, you can see from this list that they don't like anything which is too vata, too pitta, too spicy, too hot, too this. The only thing which they accept is kapha. Kapha is okay because you do hatha yoga and you sweat it out big time, and therefore kapha will never accumulate in the body of such a hatha yogi. But then you look at Shivananda, you look at Dhirendra Brahmachari, you look at others like Yogananda and so on, you see that at a certain age of their life, they became fatty. Because first of all, they were not doing 1 hour of headstand per day anymore. They were not doing 100 Udyanas and 100 Naulis. Their attention in yoga was somewhere else. I don't want to talk bad about these people. I just want to show that even in the world of yoga, you have to take such advice with a pinch of salt, because in some situations, amla or pepper can be very indicated for you, for your issues, while for Svatmarama was too much. and rightly so. Next time, we'll start from this 59. I'll read it again to refresh, and I will go to 60 and 61, and in 62 he will go and say, on the contrary, the following foods are beneficial for those who practice yoga. So he gives you what is a no-no and what is a yes-yes according to his opinion. So in this way, you can have a clear vision of it. Thus, the Shloka 59 is the borderline where we stopped tonight in reading together the Hatha Yoga Pradipika and trying to understand the message of such a great yogi. Next time, we are going to finish the chapter 1, and we will move to the chapter of pranayama and mudras, to the second chapter. This chapter 1 was, as you can see, dedicated to lifestyle, diet, and asanas of Hatha Yoga. Enough for tonight. Thank you all for joining. See you on the next activities here in Agama. May this be beneficial to all.